Good afternoon, everybody who's on the East Coast. Welcome to everybody from around the world. We have an exciting new guest tonight, and we have an exciting number of new subscribers. Between yesterday and today, we've added about 1,000 Grizzlies to the list. So, welcome everybody. I'm glad you could be here. Thanks, G, and thanks Grizzly True Crime and the Grizzly Nation. I really appreciate that. It's been a pretty wild ride over the last hour, so it's been pretty interesting. So just a couple of quick notes before I introduce my guest. This Tuesday, 7 p.m. I have author and journalist Elon Green, who wrote the book Last Call, which is about love, lust, and murder in New York City, and it's going to be a pretty fun night. He's going to talk about his book, about all the different cases that have been tied into it. So without any further ado, I'm going to bring in our guest because this is who you're really here to see. This is Heidi Chance. She is a retired law enforcement officer that spent over 25 years with the Phoenix Police Department. She is currently working in a capacity now in law enforcement. So I'd just like to welcome you to the show. How are you, Heidi?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much.
Very good. So Heidi, you were involved when you were in Phoenix. You were involved with the H.E.A.T unit, right? Which is the human exploitation and trafficking unit. Could you just tell us a little bit about how that operated a little bit, and then we'll get into a little bit of your background.
Yeah, so I joined when I first started in that unit. It actually was called Vice, and then probably about year 8, because I was there almost 14 years. It turned to the Human Exploitation and Trafficking Unit. And basically, when I first started, what's unique to my perspective, because I was there so long, is I really witnessed the evolution of how we respond to human trafficking. Initially, when I first started back in 2008, we were arresting prostitutes. We would run operations where we'd have male detectives pose as sex buyers, and we would do that all day long, almost every day. And then we gradually moved into viewing this issue how we should have been all along, and actually seeing most of these exploited persons as victims. And so that's how we treat them now. But unfortunately, because in the trafficking world, traffickers tell their victims the police are just going to arrest you, and then that's what we were doing, and some agencies still do that. That's where we have a lot of repairing relationships still left to do. And that's what makes this work really, really difficult. One of many things.
Yeah, no, it is a tough topic, and actually, just about a week or so ago, the Long Island newspaper, Newsday, had just put out Long Island was one of the top places where this actually occurs. So, just for those who are joining us now, we have Heidi Chance. She's a retired law enforcement officer, currently working with human trafficking and victims. Today's show, just remember, it's a trigger warning for some people, so we need to make sure that we let everybody know. But this show today is about victims, it's about awareness, it's about prevention, it's about education. And we're going to discuss all those things. But there's some very tough topics that we're going to get into today. So one of the interviews I saw you did, you talked about supply and demand. And could you explain what that means in regards to the level that you were working in to try to combat this issue?
Yeah, so human trafficking is labor trafficking and sex trafficking. Some people don't actually realize that actually the words human trafficking encompass both of those crimes. But specifically sex trafficking is where I was describing the law of supply and demand. This is a business. The supply is traffickers providing the demand, which is the sex buyers, the victims to exploit. Traffickers are exploiting those victims, sex buyers are exploiting those victims, and it's really a matter of the whole dynamics of this crime having this demand, and the demand also includes younger and younger victims, and that's coming from the demand. So that's what's moved this into not just a crime of prostitution, but actual child exploitation and other crimes.
Now, you had also talked about it before, you were discussing about going after, the working girls, and then you kind of switched that up, right? So what was that like?
So we've always done operations targeting sex buyers. It's just initially we were really focused on the prostitution problem and making arrests for prostitution. And so we've continued our focus on sex buyers. And I think part of the evolution is to increase that effort, as well as more creative ways to go after sex buyers. For example, using female officers that look young enough to pose as juveniles and actually charging sex buyers with felonies. And then also doing creative operations targeting traffickers, where we will target them on social media. Out on the street, we used to walk away, not even look at them in the eye, because that's what was common for the real prostitutes. And as an undercover, now we engage with traffickers, and we're learning a lot. It's definitely more dangerous, but it is what we really have moved towards doing, is going after traffickers and taking them out, both at the level of undercover work, but also financially with doing money laundering, illegal enterprise type of financial investigations on them.
Now, you were an undercover too. You did this for a long time. What was the training like to prepare officers to do this? Because it's not an easy thing, and you really put yourself in harm's way. What was the training like for this?
So it was on the job training for me.
As
It was
usual,
one of
right?
those,
Baptism by
hey,
fire.
yeah, hey, come from patrol. We need a new decoys. We need a new face out there. And so I
Oh
really
boy.
learned on the job. However, when I was finally in the unit and established there, I created training for undercover female decoys. And that's part of what I do now. When I educate law enforcement, I train how to do these operations, how to have these conversations, how to remain safe for officer safety, all of those things.
Right. And for those that are interested in what she does, her website is in the show notes, achancephorawareness.com. If one of the mods could share that with everybody, I'd appreciate that. So you can go and check it out. And there's some interviews on there. It's about some of the training that you offer and some good prevention tips and stuff. We're going to get into that a little bit later on. But how much has social media been a game changer in this battle?
So the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children actually put out a statistic that there was a 93% increase since COVID-19 of sexual exploitation and all crimes related to sexual exploitation online. And so social media really is huge, because if you think about it, traffickers don't have a job. They don't go to work every day. Their only job is to manage the victims they have and seek out new victims. And with the internet, they're able to cast that fishing line and copy and paste a message to hundreds of profiles a day and interact with anyone who comments back when they cast out that message. So that has definitely allowed them to kind of be anonymous and then absolutely recruit and groom victims without ever even meeting them, at least start those initial conversations just like a predator would. And the internet is absolutely a game changer for traffickers to increase their business and exploit more victims.
What is like some of the things that they would write in there? Like, how would they try to engage with somebody? And and then if you can, after that, if you can answer like who makes the quote unquote perfect candidate for them?
Yeah, so as an undercover, I have 6 Facebooks, 3 Instagrams, Tagged, Meet Me, Bumble, Plenty of Fish, Snapchat, TikTok. I just got a Discord, all in undercover personas. So I definitely know those messages that I've received. And typically those messages are the initial, girl, you're fine. You look so beautiful. Do you have a boyfriend? Do you have folks? All kinds of little hints at what they're trying to say, as far as finding out if you're available and could engage in, cooperation with leaving to go with them. Thinking about your vulnerabilities. Are you happy where you're at? Let me put you in a position to win. Let me take you to Vegas, Miami. Let me get your hair done, your nails done. And obviously those things are simple things, but for a 15-year-old who's mad at their parents right now, or doesn't like going to school, or isn't getting along, with their parents, if someone's, offering to take them traveling, promising them all these gifts, encouraging them as far as giving, them a boost to their self-esteem, that's actually really enticing and somewhat simple, but it's it's manipulation to its core, and it is what's working for these traffickers, because that's how they're luring away, especially the juveniles.
Wow. And is it just the social media platforms that you had mentioned before, or are they trying to infiltrate like the games that the kids play on the internet? Are they doing anything like that? I mean, I know Fortnite is a big game out there. Are they using those avenues too?
Yeah, not as much, but definitely traffickers are there. But more of the sex buyers and child predators are there, looking for vulnerable individuals. Also, these apps on the phone, like some of these apps are like Whisper, Yik Yak. These are anonymous apps where you don't have like a home-based profile like Facebook or Instagram, and it's literally you take a picture, you put words on it, you post it, and people can immediately start chatting with you and trip you to a private conversation and all those things. So it's definitely very dangerous, but definitely on all platforms that have the ability to private message.
That's pretty awful and pretty scary when you think about it, right? For all the good the internet does, there's lots of bad it does too in regards to this. I mean, we've seen it with now, of course, the Long Island serial killer. You probably have heard about this, even though you're out all the way out west. But using the internet and things like Backpage and Craigslist and all these other things to pick these girls up, and then I'm sure this has been a pattern too, going across the country where this is happening, and it's like you said, international. What's what are they from any specific country per se, or is it just people living in the United States, or where do we see that international angle?
So I have a perspective from the inner city, especially in the city of Phoenix, with trafficking happening domestically, where it's individuals who are U.S. citizens. They are, what I've noticed is that it's almost like a generational trait or a learned thing. Their father was a trafficker, their cousin or their older brother or someone in their life. And unfortunately, kind of like the plumber guy who has a business, wants to leave his plumbing company to his kids, it's kind of the same thing with trafficking, where traffickers are encouraging and teaching their younger kids how to conduct these businesses. So I forgot what your, your original question was, but it's definitely a learned behavior that I've noticed.
And it's like, is it like it always used to be, the use of fear and physical punishment kind of thing to keep them in line, so to speak?
Yeah, so force, fraud, and coercion are all elements of trafficking. And, obviously force is pretty self-explanatory, physical incident, violent assault. But the fraud and the coercion come in different forms. So part of the fraud is those false promises. I'm going to get you an apartment. I'm going to take you traveling. We just have to do this for a little while. We got things to pay for. But we're going to have this amazing life, dangling this carrot, but never really coming through with any of those false promises. And then the coercion is very real because it's the threats. Obviously, traffickers use the information they learn from you about your family, about your siblings, about your parents, about where you live. All of those things are used against you, and those threats are very real. I always tell people the thing that I've learned the most doing this work is that a trafficker is the most reliable person you will ever meet. If they say they're going to beat you up, they're going to beat you up. If they say they're going to get you in the car and they're going to take their gun and they may or may not shoot at your mom's house, they're going to get you in the car kicking and screaming. They're going to take out their gun and they're going to aim it at the house. And whether they fire or not, that's depending on their mood. But they want that victim to believe what I say is going to happen. Otherwise, these victims wouldn't stay. So that the coercion and the threats are very real.
Yeah, it's amazing. And have you seen even like family members get involved in doing this to their own kids or relatives?
Yeah, I've actually had situations where I've arrested pimps' moms for destroying evidence, for intimidating witnesses, financially benefiting off the trafficking of the victims, all of those things. So it's definitely a situation where family members are at bare minimum knowledgeable of what the traffickers are doing.
Yeah, it's a god awful situation when you think about what's happened and what's happening and continuing to go on, and things are getting worse and worse too. I know we have lots of problems at the border right now, which opens up a whole other avenue without even getting into the politics behind that. But for border states and stuff like that, this has got to give you guys nightmares, all this stuff that's going on.
Yeah, the issue with that type of trafficking is a little bit more difficult for us as undercovers, because literally you have to have, Mexico Spanish to be able to infiltrate and have an undercover be invited into going to a Mexican brothel. Some of them are out in the open. They're advertising on like La Campesina magazine and Spanish magazines or Spanish websites. But some of it is so underground that you kind of have to be a part of the community and then get invited in. Same with massage parlors. Massage parlors are typically Asian in dynamics, and that is even more difficult for us to have those victims come forward and talk, because unlike what you see on TV, as you know, we don't have like the ability to snap our fingers and have witness protection come get their family from China and bring them to the United States if they cooperate in a case. So very difficult to have those types of investigations.
Yeah, and we kind of dealt with that a little bit in New York, going back several years ago. A large cargo ship washed up on the Rockaways, and there were hundreds of people in the hull of the ship that were found. I mean, I think it was, I don't know if it was 400, or it was so many
Wow.
people in the hull of that ship, and they were paying off debts, and they were being brought to the United States and being forced to do all sorts of nefarious things just to try to pay their way back to the United States. So it happens just about everywhere, no matter where you live in this country, because they have to come in somewhere, right? And the ports, whatever, and then they get you see a lot of that where they're coming in, let's just say from the borders, or they're coming in, on the East Coast or the West Coast, and then they just start being shipped all across the country. Is that how they pretty much do it? Is there like an underground system that they use?
All of the above. I mean, we've seen tunnels, we've seen buses, we've seen vehicles, stolen vehicles transporting people. Part of that, though, is the smuggling, which is different from human trafficking. So smuggling is a crime against, obviously, the state or the border, and that involves some element of consent, at least initially. And that is the transportation from point A to point B. Someone who is smuggled, however, like you said, can be a victim of human trafficking if they're forced to perform sex acts or forced to perform labor. But that is definitely a separate, smuggling is a separate thing going on than human trafficking.
What are some suggestions that you would have for, family members, parents, uncles, aunts, grandmothers, grandpas, whoever's in charge of the kids, that, signs to look for the kids, so that to try to, keep them away from this kind of interaction on the internet?
Yeah, so I do have tips for parents and for teens on my website, but just
Oh, great.
for reference sake here, obviously having the conversations earlier than you think. The national age of entry into sex trafficking nationally here in the United States is 13 years old. It used to be 15 when I first started, and it's inching more and more towards 12, 11. So that means those conversations need to start happening way earlier. And those conversations need to be about, hey, if you're online, first of all, obviously parents need to take care and what apps and phones and devices they allow their children to be on in the whole first place. But having conversations with, hey, if someone tells you to delete your conversation with them, they're not a friend and I want you to come talk to me. Or, hey, if someone tells you to be secretive and create a whole nother profile, let's talk about that and why they're doing that. And please come tell me. Or, hey, so if someone's telling you they want to meet you in person, but to not tell your mom and dad, that's a problem. And this is what might be going on with that person. And we need to not let that happen. And you need to be safe and not tell them personal information about yourself and those kind of things. And then the whole other situation where anything you post on the internet never goes away. So if you're going to post a picture or share a picture with someone and they may post it, that better be an appropriate picture that you would want anyone to see forever. So lots of things to have happen as far as conversations. And then as far as the devices, there are two companies that I know of that are pretty good: Bark Technologies and Gab, Gabb, Gab Wireless. Actually, if you use the code H.E.A.T for awareness, you'll get a discount on a purchase of either of those devices. But they actually have smartphones, like with the swipe screen and everything, and then smart watches that look like an iPhone or an Android phone, a fancy phone, but they do not get on the internet. Or you can have it be where they have particular parental controls. So those are devices that if you're going to give them a phone at 8 years old, then give them a Bark phone or a Gab phone.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting little piece of advice there. I mean, it's well, I guess what age is appropriate now, right, for the kids to get online and do all this stuff. I see, toddlers in their strollers on iPads and doing stuff and playing games and what have you. So it has changed greatly. But I guess too, you have to talk to parents and try to explain to them that this is not your kid's fault, right? Because I think a lot of times kids are scared to tell their parents because they think they're going to get in trouble, like they did something wrong. How do we get that message to parents saying, like, listen, this is not your kid's fault. This is how this is how you have to treat it.
Yeah, I think that message comes from parents doing what, they should be doing as far as making themselves aware of these apps. For example, the Saturn app. The Saturn app was pushed actually out by the schools. Hey, parents, download this app. It's a chance for your child to communicate with their teacher and other students. But the Saturn app isn't got any protections. I could create a Saturn app profile, and now I have a whole pool of kids I could talk to if I was a predator. So these two companies that I mentioned do a really good job of staying up to date on these apps, and they have a blog. Both of them have blogs where they comment on and inform parents about the dangers and the abilities for predators, traffickers, sex buyers to be on these apps. And it's really a job for parents now that, we're giving our kids technology, but you have to take the responsibility as a parent to understand what you're giving your kids, just like you would with medications, just like you would with, food allergies or anything like that. With technology is another thing that we need to have be at that level where parents do their due diligence to figure out what it is their kids are digesting or having contact with on these apps.
Yeah, and I guess it depends on the age of the parents too. I mean, like for instance, I'm, I didn't have my first computer till I was like, 30 years old, right? So, all this stuff is still new to me. I'm still learning how to do all this stuff, but you know, uh, the parents do have to be engaged somehow, and to be able to do this. Like I saw in one of your interviews, and maybe we can talk about this now because actually, however we get this information across, about movies, right? So there's been some movies that have used this topic as it's basically as a means of like almost like an awareness kind of thing. Can we go through some of your choices that some movies that maybe parents should watch?
Yeah, absolutely. I would start with Sex Trafficking in America, which is the documentary that I'm featured in, along with all of my squad mates. It was a really good job done by Frontline PBS that shows kind of an up-to-date how trafficking is happening and how law enforcement's responding to it with our undercover operations. And it follows actually a case of a juvenile that was lured away from home by a potential romantic relationship she was going to have, and then she gets kind of traded to some other traffickers and taken to the Phoenix area and trafficked, and a lot of horrific things that happened to her, and it kind of follows through to the point where those three traffickers all resolved their cases with either well, all of them got prison time, I believe, but none of them took it to trial. But it's a really good depiction of up to date what law enforcement's doing to respond to this problem. You hear me on the phone getting recruited by a pimp from a Facebook page that I had, and all kinds of things. And then on top of that, obviously, Sound of Freedom. If anyone is aware of Sound of Freedom, it is what is kind of the buzz movie right now. It's a depiction of international human trafficking, not necessarily exactly what it looks like here in the United States, but it's got people thinking about human trafficking, and it does show, the horrificness of the crime. And then there is a movie that I believe is coming to actual, like a platform where it'll be out. It's called Wake Up, the movie. I saw it on Delta Airlines, actually. They were playing that movie, and that's a really good depiction. It's based on true stories, so it's not completely all true. Especially, I don't know, like the part where it depicts a cop as a trafficker, but most of the movie is how it is happening as far as the trafficker depicted in the film, you can see him spend some time on social media recruiting a girl. And then a girl that's more vulnerable, who's in the child welfare system, he recruits her within 24 hours. And then you see, obviously, how the sex buyer side of it is a man who's married with a daughter, and he is initially watching pornography, like locking himself in the bedroom, watching pornography, and then moves into an actual live going to call a prostitute and visit the prostitute at her hotel. So that shows the reality of pornography and how that's encouraging this behavior also as far as buyers. So it's just a really good movie to show how it's happening here domestically.
That's actually interesting. Actually, Heather N asked a pretty interesting question. I don't know if you, is there a signal for trafficking victims? I guess, there's like a distress signal, or they do, for those who are being abused through domestic violence and stuff like that. Is there one, or is there planning on being one?
Well, there is the National Human Trafficking Hotline, which is managed by Polaris, formerly Polaris Project. And if you see in the airports, there are the signs as far as, contact someone on the airline and contact the National Human Trafficking Hotline. The thing about the hotline is, and there's a little bit of I don't even know what's going on with them, but they don't want to be mandatory reporters. And I totally get that. It was originally developed for survivors to call, not necessarily have law enforcement involvement. So, but it's to the point now where, government agencies are trying to make them mandatory reporters. But it is definitely an option for survivors to escape the life and not necessarily have law enforcement involvement. As far as signs, I mean, it's definitely where people need to recognize some of the indicators. Tattoos are big. Just like we're all watching Yellowstone right now, and the Duttons have their farm and they put the yellow or the Y for Yellowstone on their cows, and they get upset when someone steals their cows. Traffickers put their moniker, their nickname, their symbol on victims. So if you are at the QT or the gas station and you're in line and you see, 3 individuals with the same or similar tattoos, and it seems like they're being controlled by someone else, that's like a huge indicator for you as a normal citizen to see and observe that. And then you'll be able to call the National Human Trafficking Hotline. You could call your local police department silent witness. You could call, some of the states are creating their own hotline. Arizona has its own hotline. And it's one of those things where you may not want a patrol car to show up at where you're at or stand there outside the patrol car and talk to a uniformed officer, but you want to let someone know, hey, this may be what everyone's talking about as far as trafficking. Someone should look into this. And so that's where that's an option for people to make a report.
Yeah, no, listen, the more education that we get out there, the more information for parents specifically. I mean, I do a lot of traveling too, like yourself, right? And always doing something. And I see these signs at hotels, right? So hotels seem to be like a common area used by these traffickers.
Yeah. So when I talk and educate the public about trafficking, one of the points that obviously people bring up is Super Bowl or major events. When you think about those events, they're typically attended by men. And as I described, this is the supply and demand, and the demand is typically men. And so it is where traffickers aren't dumb, and they're going to try and take their victims to where they're going to get a lot of clients. And so they follow these major events. But to your point, as far as, these hotels, this is a very transient lifestyle. These traffickers are, and that's part of the control and the isolation. They're constantly moving from city to city, state to state. One, obviously, because they don't want to get caught by the police, but 2, because they want to keep their victims so isolated that they are completely dependent on the trafficker. And for example, if they're at a hotel too long and the trafficker sees the victim talking to the janitor at the hotel, that normal person might tell the victim, hey, let me help you get away from this person. And they don't want that. So they're constantly traveling around, very transient with those intents.
Gotcha. Yeah, I didn't even think about it with the Super Bowl next week, right? There's always been
Yeah.
talk about what happens at the Super Bowl. I mean, I've never been to a Super Bowl, never experienced any of that stuff, but I guess some of those rumors are true about what precedes the big game.
Yeah, I mean it's I've had traffickers where I looked at their internet history and they've searched military bases, they've searched conferences where a lot of men work, and then obviously these large events, and that's all with the intent of bringing their victims to where potential clients would be, because it's all about making as much money as possible.
So how do they go about doing that? So like the Super Bowl is going to be next week. What kind of thing is put in place by law enforcement? I mean, what do they do to try to combat this?
Yeah, so obviously leading up to Super Bowl, during Super Bowl, and even after Super Bowl, there's a high concentration of undercover operations. I participated in the two Super Bowls here in Phoenix prior to this most recent one that happened last year. But I participated in a different way last year. But as an undercover, running operations, targeting sex buyers, and also traffickers, being present physically at these events in an undercover capacity, making observations, engaging with traffickers in the hotel bars and things. That's all. We're there. We're definitely there.
And I guess you know what though, I think maybe more of a big push by the media to let everybody know that listen, the police are doing all kinds of undercover operations. Right? People are like, oh, you're gonna blow it. No, it's called deterrence, right? If people think that the person they're talking to is a cop, or they know there's cops around in undercovers, maybe they can help, relieve some of this. I mean, I don't know. What do you think about that? Just let everybody know what's
Yeah.
going on so that they stop doing it.
Yeah, it's definitely a matter of people wanting to know how to solve this problem. And now that it's more out there, why is it such a problem? And it's a problem because men are buying sex. I have not yet, nor have I had a colleague ever report an incident where a female was buying sex. So if men stop buying sex and stop believing what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, this whole problem will go away. And, I can't apologize for saying that, because that is my experience. My professional subject matter expert experience is that men are buying sex. So we need to really create legislation that makes it more serious for sex buyers, so that they think twice, as, not only could I lose my family and get an STD and all these things, but also I might get a felony. That's where we need to be at. And there's states that are working towards doing that.
So, do you think this wasn't part of the program? So, I don't know if you can answer this or not. But do you think that legalization would prevent some of this, or would it only make it worse?
Well, if we want to learn from people who have done this already, like the Netherlands, it isn't working for it to be legalized. In fact, it actually made it 100 times worse. And if you listen to survivors, they're of the opinion that that will only make it worse. And I think we can learn a lot from listening to survivors who've actually experienced this firsthand. And if they're saying that's a bad idea, it's a bad idea.
Yeah, I hear you. I mean, every time they try to legalize something, the government, when they get involved with it, they end up taxing it too high and create a black market for it anyway. And they just try to, kind of. So Raul's got a great question here. Maybe you can answer for us. It says, "What can we all do to make trafficking awareness a priority among the media? Like, how do we draw attention to it so that the media takes a more active role in this?" Thanks, Raul.
Yeah. So I don't know if you remember, but when, and maybe it was the Reagan administration or leading into the Bush administration, but we used to have all these public service announcement commercials. This is your brain. This is your brain on drugs. I have never seen a public awareness commercial on human trafficking. Have you?
No, I haven't. I actually never even thought of it until you just mentioned that.
Yeah. So I think besides the awareness that myself and other organizations are trying to do on a small level, because I don't have that big of a following yet, I'm trying, but the media could help us all out by making the community aware of how bad this problem is, what it looks like, all of those things. So it's definitely an idea to have regular public service announcements about human trafficking, especially surrounding large events.
Yeah, right. There's a perfect opportunity next week, right? Maybe something from the White House can be finally done in regards to that. I mean, legislation is always something that's difficult, right? To have, do we even have a human trafficking month? do we have any recognition at all on it?
Yeah, January was National Human Trafficking Awareness Month, and then specifically January 11th is Wear Blue Day, and that is where you can wear blue to signify that you're aware of human trafficking.
Yeah, you taught me something today too.
Yeah.
So, it's something to think about for next January. But you know what? Every day should be about this, right? Not just about a month or a specific day. But we have to kind of put that towards, our goal as people now, in the true crime community, and many of us, some of us, not me yet, but we have huge followings, and they could get that message out too. But I like your idea about getting a public announcement made by the president, right? Coming from the White House, I think would be an extremely important aspect of it, right? Because everybody our age or my age, right? I'm not going to speak for you, but we remember that here's your brain on drugs is something that you still remember, even at 55 years old, that you still remember that kind of stuff. I mean, I'm just a Bill on, Capitol Hill, right? Those cartoons that were going on. So maybe we need to get back to some of those public service things on TV. Maybe, I know Netflix and all these other things, maybe they, instead of showing commercials, maybe they can show a, something like that before a start of a movie, especially if it's about that topic.
Yeah. And then even on social media, government organizations have their own social media.
Exactly. I mean, at least, I'm actually kind of surprised that we haven't had more of an public outcry about this. And now you're the second individual that I've had on there because Francine, right? Franny, she was on
Yes,
here.
I do.
Yep, and she's introduced you to me, thankfully. But as we get deeper into this topic, I mean, it just seems to get worse, right? There never seems to be any kind of like light at the end of the tunnel because it's just it's not recognized by so many people.
Yeah, we definitely need to change the mindset of this is an underground thing, that this is only happens in poor communities or it only happens to certain demographics of people. And all of those things are myths because I have an investigation involving 7 victims, 2 juveniles, one of which entered the life of prostitution in her 40s, was a former Department of Corrections officer, met the trafficker at a strip club when she started becoming a stripper, and then became a prostitute out of his brothel. And then that same case had a girl whose mother was a nurse, pretty well off, full ride scholarship to Northern Arizona University, met a photographer on Craigslist that convinced her to come to Phoenix. He introduced her to the brothel owner, and her entire life went the whole other direction. She's now a resident of our prison here in Arizona. So it isn't just the poor kids. It isn't just the kids in child welfare or in the foster system or the runaways. It isn't just young kids. It's anyone, any demographic, any race, any age.
Yeah, it's amazing. Is there something that goes on though in people's lives that kind of leads them down this path? I mean, do we see like we see in a lot of things like drugs and domestic violence and all kinds of stuff like that? So I mean, you're talking about older adults, right? We're not talking about kids who could be easily influenced by somebody on the internet. I mean, you're talking 40-year-olds, people who had careers. Like, how does that happen?
Yeah, it's crazy. I think what it is with that instance and some of the others is vulnerabilities. Traffickers are skilled at manipulating vulnerabilities, and that's with anyone. We all have vulnerabilities, so it's a matter of how they discover you. If you're out in the open, constantly talking about it, posting things on social media about it, they are watching that, and they will make extra effort to engage with you if you seem vulnerable to them.
It's almost as if they're making people as a commodity, and that's basically what currency, however you want to call it. I mean, that's to me, that's the first thing that I think of when I hear you talk about this. Is like we're talking about human beings as commodity, like you would trade, gold and silver and everything else.
Yeah, I think what it is regular criminals, gangsters, drug dealers are recognizing that trafficking a person, which can be done 24/7 over and over again all day long, is way more profitable. Also, you don't get caught with an item, a stolen property or drugs. If you, let's say, get pulled over by the police, then you have someone in your vehicle and you control the mouth of that person and they don't say anything, you're not going to get caught for anything. Plus, you're going to make a whole bunch more money when you arrive to where you're heading to after that traffic stop. So it's definitely a situation where criminals are seeing the profitability of exploiting people.
And it just seems to be nothing getting better, right? This thing, has it gotten worse since
I
you
would
got involved
say,
in this?
yeah, I would say the internet has definitely made it worse. And that's where, we start having these platforms be held accountable. You mentioned Backpage and Craigslist. Those two platforms have been spanked, so to speak. But unfortunately, all these other little platforms have popped up and they don't care about the United States rules or subpoenas or search warrants because they're not based out of the United States. And they are what's replaced Backpage and Craigslist, the adult services section. So unfortunately, that didn't work and that exploded into a whole nother issue. We do obviously have recourse with, what I've seen is instead of this just being a cash business, the convenience of Zelle or Chime or Cash App or Venmo, PayPal, all of that is now something traffickers are using, which is fine by me because then I can identify them through their financial transactions, plus see where that money's going to charge them with other felonies. So, we are doing a better job. We were not doing financial investigations before. Now we are. And I think that's really where we need to maintain focus in addition to the undercover operations is take them out financially.
You brought up a great point about making some of the penalties even stiffer, but in the age of criminal justice reform, where we seem to think that everybody doesn't belong in jail and all these cases, I mean, in New York City by itself, removed the loitering for purposes of prostitution from the books that law enforcement can actually enforce, right? So I did an interview about this and I said, this is the most terrible idea going. I said, in 6 months from now, politicians are going to be scratching their head because all these brothels and everything else will be open all over. We have these women are going to be walking around the streets. And sure enough, it took a little longer than 6 months, but there it is, right? So how do we deal with that, right? So I like the idea about punishing people more, especially the Johns, for doing this, because if you can reduce that part of it, you can reduce the whole overall thing. But in criminal justice reform worlds, how do we even think about doing something like that?
Yeah, you've got a big problem on your hands over there. And if that spreads, we're all in trouble. I definitely think that in addition to stricter punishments for sex buyers, there is legislation out there trying to make it an automatic life in prison for any trafficker who traffics anyone under the age of 18. And I'm all for that. I've had cases where I have put traffickers away, one of which was 493.5 years. That was 7 victims, the 2 juveniles, but also just a one victim, 108 years. So lifetime in prison, that's definitely where we need to lean more towards, because it needs to be the absolute worst thing you could do besides homicide is traffic another person, especially a juvenile.
I'm all for it. I'll give that 2 thumbs up. But
Yeah.
like I said, it's tough in many big cities and states where a lot of the stuff is really where it's happening. So, I mean, I could imagine trying to give that kind of legislation in New York City right now and saying, oh, hey, by the way, this is what we want to do. They would look at you like, wait, they're trying to empty Rikers Island. They're trying to close it, right? So you don't want to even put people in jail. But here's a question from Joni. How do you avoid burnout doing what you do? Because this has got to take a toll on you personally.
Yeah, it's definitely frustrating because a lot of my cases, I've put in a lot of effort, a lot of work. And unfortunately, because of the justice system, it takes 1, 2, 3, 5 years to go to trial sometimes. And victims don't want to stick around. And if they don't stick around, I can't do this without you. I mean, I can do the financial part, but the actual you being the victim, if you bow out and don't want to press charges anymore, this, unfortunately, we can't move forward. So it's definitely what helps me is the wins that I've had. It's very encouraging to be able to talk about a case where I put someone in prison for almost 500 years. And I do that often. I talk about it often only because it inspires me to keep going, but I also want to inspire other law enforcement when I conduct these trainings. That, these cases are awful. They're really hard. Like homicide has it easy. Their victim is dead right there. They're not going anywhere. They're not going to disappear. They're not going to change their mind on you. But we have to invest, a bunch into our case and keep our victim on board to want to still press charges. So it's very rewarding to be able to train law enforcement and encourage them to do these cases. And all of the successes I've had keeps me going for sure.
Good answer. So Sinead, all the way from Ireland, has a question that says, is there some
Oh.
sort of awareness in schools? If they do anything in our schools to let kids know that this is a possibility of what's going on? That's a great question.
Yeah, so there are local organizations. Arizona has the Red Light Rebellion, and I talk about them often because they're like a really young married couple. They go into the schools, they do a whole training on not only sex trafficking awareness, but healthy relationships, dating violence, those kind of trainings. As far as myself, I've done trainings for like the administrators, school security, the nurse, the counselor, those kind of adults, only because I am an undercover and I try to, even though I'm in a documentary, I try to limit being seen. But definitely there are other organizations that are in the schools. I know that if you're familiar with Rachel Thomas, she's a survivor. She actually was in college as an adult and got pursued by a trafficker who offered her a modeling career. And she ended up getting trafficked, and he got caught, and resulted in him getting prison and everything. And she was able to escape him. But she has a whole program. If you Google Rachel Thomas, there's it's anti something, but it's a website that parents can take like a quiz, and based on the answers, whether or not it's concerning to the parent based on their answers, and then immediately directs them to resources based on the behaviors that their child's exhibiting. And it could be more towards either a child predator pursuing their child or a trafficking situation. So she has a really great program. It is actually being put out nationally. So it is really good. I wish I remembered it. But Rachel Thomas, if you Google her, and it's anti-something. But there's definitely programs in the schools, and we need that for sure.
We got a question here from Mandy. She writes, do you end up losing victims back into the trafficking sometimes?
Yeah, that is definitely an issue. That one trafficker that I was talking about that we put away for 108 years, the one victim testified against him on her 18th birthday. She put him away. We had her safe. She was transitioning from the child welfare system into an adult program. They were getting her apartment. They were going to get her a job. We helped her legally change her name because this trafficker is so dangerous and put out threats against her life. She was getting set up to have a full ride scholarship to Arizona State University. We have a scholarship program for victims of trafficking. And the other dynamic here is this has happened to me 4 times now. I have a pimp that I put in prison in 2012. Fast forward to right before I retired from Phoenix Police Department in 2021. We were investigating that pimp. We were ready to go do warrants. We did warrants on his 2 known locations of possible residences. And unfortunately, my victim from the other case answered the door at the warrant location and with total attitude and wanted to continue prosecuting for him. And we had her safe, and that's what breaks my heart right there, because we had her safe. She had all these things going for her. We were supporting her, but she did make the choice to go back. And at that point, obviously, she committed some other crimes, and we had to arrest her. And that really breaks my heart because I know her. I've known her since she was 16.
Wow, that's got to be tough, right? I mean, I haven't experienced, I never experienced that, but that's got to be tough in regards to that. Let's just pivot just a little bit, and let's talk about what are some of the signs that law enforcement needs to look for.
Yeah, so I think one of the main things, and this is, I'm sure, a dynamic you've experienced, but back in 1998, I didn't have a class on human trafficking in the academy. Did you?
Yeah.
No. So we have an issue where we have law enforcement who's looking for gangsters and drug dealers and not pimps. If I didn't mention this, a trafficker is a pimp is a trafficker. It's just two technical names for the same person doing the exploitation of victims. I've seen recently on the internet, people are naming a trafficker something different than a pimp. It's a pimp. So anyway, basically, we have a situation where we have lack of law enforcement training. We have cops that don't see traffickers, and the traffickers know it. In fact, I have a Facebook Live captured evidence video that I play when I teach at the academy, showing this trafficker doing a Facebook Live, bragging about the 5 patrol cars that are behind him where they don't see him. And he's like, bragging them, we're going to keep doing what we're doing and we ain't going to get caught. And he's not wrong, because no one's looking for him. And so we have a huge issue with training. And that's why, since I retired, I have created my own side business with the achanceforawareness.com, with the intent to not only do community awareness, but also the training for law enforcement. To your question, as far as signs, obviously, when we show up to calls, there's things that we're missing if we don't know what we're looking at. Like if you show up to a loud noise complaint at a hotel, you just want the people to put the music down, you identify people, and then you leave because you want to go to lunch, right? So instead of that, when you're doing your protective sweep and you're checking the hotel for, a bad guy hiding in the bathtub, make observations. If you see a computer open to a website that might be similar to Backpage, one of those websites I was talking about with provocatively dressed girl, and it looks like in the body of the website ad is she's being advertised for sex. You see condoms, you see lubricants, you see sex toys, you see, multiple hotel keys, all of these things that you can see out in the open, and then separate people, start doing interviews, take action, and you may discover that you have more than just a loud noise complaint at the hotel. Same with traffic stops, same with domestic violence calls, same with a stolen vehicle report at a hotel. Could be a whole trafficking situation. We just don't know.
Right. So actually, I mean, just to double back for a second. So in places like Las Vegas, where it's legal in most places in Las Vegas, right? I don't think it's legal everywhere. No, it's not.
Just the one county.
Just the one county. Okay, so that's
That's
of a
why they're trying to
misconception.
get you to get in the limo or get you to go to where it is legal.
Gotcha. So that's so they're actually driving people to this locations, and that's kind of stuff. I mean, good grief! I've never been to Vegas, but after hearing all these other things, maybe I'll miss it. I won't be that disappointed. So Stevie Irwin has a great question. He says, prostitution is legal in Canada. The sex workers wanted that. How does saying just stop paying for sex affect them? How do we address that inconsistency, or are they wrong or irrelevant? So yeah, how do we do that in places where it is legal and this stuff goes on? Is there anything that can be done?
I've actually been on a couple of podcasts in Canada, and one of was a Canadian survivor. She was actually trafficked in Russia initially, or the Ukraine. Was it the Ukraine? In Europe somewhere. But she definitely talks about the fact that, and maybe this is how this happened and why it's legalized, is no one asked the survivors. When people talk about sex work, that's almost like us coming up with a word to describe this situation to make it more accepting. And, with all kinds of other things that we come up with words to describe to make things accepting, we don't know that it's accepted by that person. We don't know that they're not still being forced to be in that situation. We just don't know. Let's say that it, just like in Vegas, in that one county where there's the bunny ranch. You heard of the bunny ranch? I've actually been there. Kind of as an undercover situation where I was at a conference and 2 officers from Fresno wanted to go check it out. I said, hell yeah, I want to go see this place. And when I was in there, obviously we're asking questions, we're acting like we want to, rent a room and a provider. But in actuality, we're trying to learn information. And, they're banking on the fact that our providers are tested for STIs, but the patrons aren't tested. So if a patron comes in there and gives one of your provider an STI, they get fired because they can no longer work there. So what's to say that if it's legalized, that because they got fired, they have nothing else to put on their resume, their trafficker, who actually was forcing them to work there in the first place, now does it more underground and has them continue to do business, but advertise in a different way, whether it's word of mouth or, there are other ways that they advertise. We don't know that that wasn't a voluntary situation. We don't know that they won't get fired if they get an STI, all of those dynamics. And it's just a big, I am definitely of the opinion that's not the right answer here. The right answer is men stop buying sex.
Right, and unfortunately, the only way you can probably do that is by, like you said before, penalties that are worth a deterrent to like look at it. I mean, other than that, I mean, it's kind of when you what you're saying is like holy cow, right? So if we legalize it, we're still going to have this problem, and actually becomes even worse. And by doing what we're doing is not working either. So there's something else has to be on the table, and that has to do with prosecution. That's the only way to do this. And unfortunately, like I said before, there's so many progressive DAs out there, they won't touch that with a 10-foot pole. And it's just, it's a shame exactly what's happening.
Yeah, it's definitely an issue when we don't have prosecutors wanting to pursue those. And a lot of it's where they're thinking it's not got jury appeal, but I don't think we should base pursuing a crime that we're taking an oath to, take action on based on whether or not the jury is going to, like it or not. And that's where part of my community awareness is I, every time I present, ask the question, have you ever served on a jury? And then I make a joke about all the other people who are probably throwing those papers away. But it is a situation where if you serve on a jury, it's a huge, huge deal. And I want them to recognize that when we're talking about this person being a victim, I may be describing them freely walking down the side of the road with a phone in their hand, but they are still trapped. They are not free to leave. And here's why. And here's the evidence we found that supports why. And so definitely educating the community will create juries that will find jury appeal in these cases.
Interesting concept, right? Something that needs to be looked at and discussed, and something needs to be done about it. And first of all, have to have the awareness part of it. So this is like, I started off the show. I said this is about victims, about awareness, about education, and about prevention. But we need our elected officials to get more involved in this and to actually make this a priority. Because if they don't, this is only going to get worse.
Absolutely.
So as we are winding down now, that hour flew by very quickly. I'm going to give you the last word. What? Just tell us, tell us where we can find you again. All these are in the show notes, but just look to hear from you. If you have any other social media, we put your Instagram up there already. But if you have any other like Twitter or anything else that you want to announce, just please do so.
Yeah, so I have my website at chanceforawareness.com. And on my website, in addition to the tips for parents and teens, there's also another downloadable sheet of some of the indicators. We've only talked about a couple, but I have prepared an entire list so you can print it out, keep it for reference, especially if you are concerned with someone you may know that might be being trafficked. If you see some of the indicators on this list, then you have answered your own question as to maybe reporting it. And then I also have an online course that I created as far as a human trafficking awareness, where you can learn more about this. It's longer than an hour, so it's definitely very detailed as far as some of the things we talked about today. I'm on LinkedIn under my name. I need to create a company page, but I haven't yet, under Heidi Chance. And then I have an Instagram, which is A_chance_for_awareness. Unfortunately, I couldn't get without the underscores. But I do a lot of posting there. I share information about recent arrests, recent issues that come up all the time. I'm very active on Instagram. I have a TikTok. I don't know a TikTok. Yeah, I do have a TikTok and a Facebook page and a what's the other one? Oh, yeah, Facebook homepage, all under a chance for awareness. And then obviously my intent here is to continue the community awareness. And part of that is I'm trying to break into the public speaking scene. I have a lot of law enforcement conferences that I speak at, but I want to speak at, a convention about tech or a convention about construction or a realtors conference, because I think that the more awareness that we can put out there, that will have sex buyers realize maybe what they're doing is contributing to this problem, and they may not make that choice to do that, live engagement with a victim. And so my mission is to definitely be invited to conferences and such where it isn't just law enforcement, and I can really make an impact on this awareness situation we need to be spreading.
That's fantastic. Yep, it's all about the victims, about awareness, prevention, and of course education. And it sounds like you kind of got all that wrapped up.
Yeah.
If you could just forward me your like the TikTok and stuff like that. I added your Instagram and your website on there, but I want to add all of your things so people can find you, because I found through the doing this that people prefer certain social media stuff and they might not be on the others. So if you could just forward those in an email, whatever, I'll gladly add them to the show notes. But Detective Chance, thank you very much for joining me today. I really appreciate it. I think the audience got another education, and so did I. So this is something we're going to continue on this topic. Going along, I have Franny has given me a whole bunch of people that I need to speak to. So we're gonna ring this out. Maybe we can get some attention and actually get somebody who can actually do something in order to try to prevent some of this stuff from happening and reduce further victimization. So everybody who came in and watched this on the live, thank you very much. If you're watching this on the replay, I appreciate it too. Everybody, you have a great day. Hang out 1 second, and
Thank you so
you guys,
much.
we'll talk to you soon. Bye.